if God loves me as much as the Bible says that he does, if he loves me enough to die for me or send his son to die for me, he knows what it is that would convince me and bring me back to him. And he's not doing it.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 63. My guest today deconverted from Christianity as recently as October of 2016, so it's pretty fresh for him. He's also a recent college graduate, and I feel like a lot of these subjects and things that we talk about today were really fresh in his mind. He was raised in an Apostolic Pentecostal home, and he had two parents that were very strong Christians. At a young age, he asked his dad if he could preach, and his dad encouraged this. So, as young as 10 years old, he was actually preaching and giving altar calls, which I thought was pretty amazing. Throughout his life, he notes in our discussion that there were moments that he remembers meeting atheists. The first few times he met an atheist, he remembers very distinctly. The first time was when he was in a daycare, and the other kids, around 6 or 7 years old, were kind of egging him on to debate this adult. And so you get the idea, the image here, that he's a very strong Christian from a very young age. The other time he runs into an atheist is ironically at a Christian school that he's attending. The third time that he encountered atheism was in college, so not too long ago, and he, as a Christian, attended an atheist club. A twist in his story that you don't normally find, or at least I haven't found in talking to people about deconversion, is that he actually, although he believed in the inerrancy of Scripture and the Bible being literal, as he got into high school, he bought in completely to the Big Bang and evolution, and he actually even debated in favor of that at his Christian school. A turning point in his story is when he watches a preacher in front of the church call forward a man who was blind and proceeds to try to heal the man of his blindness. This was, for me, just like a heart-wrenching story, just imagining the expectation of this person and the anticipation, not only of the person who is being supposedly going to be healed, but of the preacher and the congregation and just everybody involved. And this is a turning point. As deconversion continues, he worries about how this is going to affect his relationship with his fiancé at the time. And he has multiple conversations with people close to him about his process and that he's an atheist. He even speaks to his pastor. He was actively involved in the church at the time that this all happens. So it's really an amazing story. I really enjoyed meeting him and getting to speak with him, and found out today that this podcast episode is being released on his birthday. So wanted to wish Jeremy a very happy birthday today. And now here's my conversation with Jeremy. All right, well, I'd like to welcome Jeremy to the podcast today. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Do you identify, would you say you identify as an atheist or agnostic, or is there another term you prefer to use?
Yeah. I would definitely say that I'm an atheist. I've kind of like fought that word for a long time, but yeah, I'm definitely an atheist. I feel like the concept of God is kind of this attempt to answer some of the deepest questions that we have, questions like what is our purpose and, how do we get here? Who decides what's right and wrong? But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't think it's the correct answer. So yeah, I would definitely call myself an atheist. But that word just kind of like sounds so dirty.
Yeah.
It's just such a, for a lot of people, and I can relate, as a Christian hearing that word, it just kind of sounded so dirty to me. There's like this dark halo around that word atheist,
Yeah. Or like it's evil or something like.
Exactly.
Given into Satan or something,
Yeah, it's almost like people see atheists as like, either these God haters or like devil worshippers. You know what I mean? But
Right.
you know, it's like atheists. They also have this reputation. You know, I'm sure you're aware of just being these like rude, arrogant people. You know, who get off on like bashing religion and mocking people of faith. You know,
Yeah.
like the Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens style atheism. You know.
Right.
And so I've definitely seen that brand of atheism. I almost got caught up in it, you know, myself, and
Yeah.
I really had to kind of tell myself to just like chill out a little
Chill
bit.
out.
You know?
I think a lot of us have had that phase of that angry phase, you know.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I definitely had that, and for a while it was really, yeah, you just get like really adamant about your position and like,
yeah,
you know, yeah. So I think
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
understand that.
I feel like that, you know, kind of applies to a lot of uh, kind of just like a lot of ideologies that people get into. For example, like feminism. Like once you know first become a part of that, you know, label, you know, whether it's
Yeah,
atheism or whatever, you're like just this passionate person who just kind of wants to go out and like tell the whole world about it. You know what I mean? Almost like Christianity to some extent too. You
yeah.
know?
You become
Um,
evangelistic. You become evangelistic in your atheism
precisely.
or
Exactly. Yeah.
feminism or whatever it is. Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I am starting to recognize though that like those people kind of make up a small minority of atheists.
yeah,
You know, and when I say those people, I'm referring to people that are typically, you know, stereotypically, you know, rude, arrogant, like bashing religion, all that stuff. Like they
yeah,
pretty much make up a small minority of atheists. They just happen to be kind of like the loudest ones in the room, you know.
yeah,
And I feel like we all just kind of get painted with that same brush. Um,
yeah.
so
I feel like that's true of a lot of things like politics too. Like the angry people on both sides are the ones we hear, you know,
yeah,
not the
100%.
90% of the moderates, you know.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. So I mean, I think it's because of that that nowadays when people kind of ask me like what I am, I just tend to say that I'm non-religious. I feel like that tends
yeah.
to go over a little bit better, you know?
Yep, I actually still do that. If it's a crowd of people I don't know, I don't throw out the word atheist, even though I've been atheist for, you know, over a decade, you know, maybe 14 years or so.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's kind of an abrasive term still.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your early years, how Christianity influenced you when you were growing up.
Yeah, Christianity was my life, man. It really was everything to me. You know, my parents were both very devout Christians. Actually, my mom, she passed away when I was 13.
Oh,
Uh,
sorry.
but yeah, no, it's all good. But yeah, she passed away when I was 13. She was a, you know, powerful woman, loved God with all her heart. You know, one of the sweetest women that you'll ever meet, and just like super funny. And I think she's actually the reason why my dad started going to church in the first place. And you know, just so you know, my church was Apostolic Pentecostal, so
Okay.
also kind of like teetering that charismatic line a little bit. So you know, we had everything from like speaking in tongues, you know, slaying the spirit, laying on of hands, like those things were normal in our church. You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't unusual for like, you know, every Sunday, like somebody to just, you know, run around the church when they, you know, get a little excited, get a little happy, you know.
Yeah.
So those things were normal, you know, where I come from. And, but yeah, my parents super religious. My mom, she sang on the choir. She, you know, led the outreach ministry, which is pretty much like the evangelism ministry. And as far as my dad, you know, my dad kind of does it all. Like, you know, he likes to call himself like a triple threat because yeah,
It's
he
awesome.
sings, yeah, he sings, he preaches, and he like plays the piano. And for a while, he's actually like the leader of music at the church that I grew up in.
Okay, still? Or just when you were
Um,
younger?
you know what? I haven't been there in so long that I'm not even sure if he's still the minister of music there, but
Yeah.
I know that he leads praise and worship a lot. So I want to say yes, but I don't want to, you know, get in trouble for that. So,
Yeah, yeah. No problem.
but yeah, so Christianity was a big deal in our household. We played gospel music like all the time. I don't know if you're familiar with artists like, you know, Kirk Franklin, Fred Hammond.
Kirk
Um,
Franklin, I know.
yeah, Kirk Franklin is probably the most well-known one
Hmm.
that I can think of that we listen to. But yeah, we listen to him like 24/7. You know, we went to church twice a week, had our little family Bible studies, and you
Would
know,
the
it
mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry. I cut in a little bit too early. I was going to ask if, like, when you went to church the second time during the week, was it like a kids' church or was it like a full service for everybody?
So it was actually, yeah, it was for everybody. It was so we have church on Sundays and on Wednesdays. So Wednesday was more of like a Bible study night. Sunday was the official service, that everybody has. So
Okay.
so yeah, that was what we kind of did. I remember, like, Christianity was such a big deal in our house. Like, I remember like with me and my sister, before we went to bed, like my mom, she would place a chair in the middle of our bedroom, and while we're in bed, and she would like pray that an angel would come and sit in the chair to watch over us while we slept. Like, it's kind of a beautiful thing, but yeah, she would do that every now and then.
What did you think of that when you were a kid? I mean, was that comforting to you?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think that she initially started doing it because of like nightmares and things that we would have, and just not feeling safe.
Yeah.
Just being a little kid afraid of the dark, but yeah, I feel like that was her way of kind of comforting us as kids.
My mom would tell us that an angel, guardian angel, would be at like our doorway, like protecting us.
Wow.
So similar.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I thought that was just us. Okay. But yeah, they weren't, super strict parents or anything like that. Like, I wouldn't say that they pushed Christianity down our throats, or, I didn't feel like it was like toxic or abusive or anything like that.
Yeah.
We were just a normal Black Christian household.
Yeah.
Probably a little more religious than most other Christian households, but still normal for where we came from.
And your dad, you said he started going to church because of your mom. Was it,
yeah.
Did that start when they were dating, or did that start when the kids started being born, or?
I've had this conversation with my dad, I believe, just like once, and if I remember correctly, I think he told me that it was while they were dating.
Okay.
Is when he kind of got, led into the church.
Yeah. So you're growing up with two very strong Christian parents.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 100%.
And how many siblings do you have?
So that's a little complicated, but yeah, I have one blood sister. And I have several different foster brothers and sisters. I have two adopted brothers. I have one stepbrother and one stepsister. I'm trying to remember.
Wow, you're right. That is complicated.
Yeah,
That's hard to keep straight, probably.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. So growing up, though, were all of them around?
So I grew up with just my sister, like just my blood sister.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom and dad got involved in foster care. And that's how we ended up getting a lot of foster brothers and sisters.
Okay.
After my mom passed away, then my dad remarried, and that's where I get my stepbrothers and sisters from.
Okay. All right. So you grew up mainly with just the one sibling, but then later other siblings kind of here and there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she's really the one I'm really only close to be honest.
Okay.
And that's not to say anything negative about my other brothers and sisters. We just aren't as close as my sister, obviously. For obvious reasons. She's my blood sister. So
sure.
Yeah.
So I kind of interrupted a few times.
Sure.
So you're talking about how you guys would go to church 2 times a week. It was a really strong Christian household.
Yep.
Is there anything else that kind of pops out to you about your early years that you think's important to kind of mention?
I would say that just all my friends were Christian as well.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that as far as, atheists go, I only met 3 atheists in my entire life. That should tell you, what type of surroundings I had or what type of environment I kind of grew up in.
Yeah.
Those 3 atheists, I met my first one at, I was at a daycare for the Salvation Army. And one of our caregivers there was an atheist. Ironically enough, because the Salvation Army, I believe, is a religious institution.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I interviewed a guy who went to that church, to the Salvation Army. So yeah, they're pretty conservative. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think if my parents knew that I was being, kind of taken care of by an atheist caregiver, I don't know, how well that would have sat with them.
Yeah.
Because this guy was not quiet about it at all.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Like, again, we're like little kids, right? And I don't know how we got on the conversation, but somebody asked him some question that led him to say that he was an atheist. And we were like, as kids, because this is our first experience with someone who didn't believe in God, we were all like just so intrigued with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when they found that out, me being a super religious kid, definitely more religious than all my other friends at the time, they would like walk up to him and like, kind of taunt him a little bit, like, you need to get into a debate with Jeremy. Like Jeremy's gonna shut you down, like, you know.
That's really funny.
Right.
How old were you around that age?
Oh man, I had to be like,
Around that time?
I want to say like 6 or 7.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So all these little kids are going around taunting this grown man.
Exactly.
That's
And
awesome.
I obviously, like as a kid, like I was kind of scared. I didn't want to get into that with him. Even
Yeah.
though I was really strong about my faith. I didn't want to get into that type of conversation.
Yeah.
But eventually, I kind of just gave in. I was, just kind of walking alongside him on our way to the park one day. I'll never forget this moment. And I just like looked up at him, and I was just like, what is it? Like, why don't you believe in God? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I just remember him telling me, well, I just don't see any evidence for God. Like, I don't have any proof of that. And so for me, me being the kid I was just like, well, like, look up at the clouds, man. Like, how do the clouds stay up in the sky? How else, science cannot explain that. And I just remember him looking down, like, actually, scientists can explain that. Like, scientists do have explanations for that. And I was just perplexed at that thought. You know what I mean? Like, that the scientists actually have, answers for these things. And then I tried to hit him with another one. I was like, well, God is like the air. You know what I mean? Like, you can't see him, but, you still believe in the air, right? You see the air in the way that it, see oxygen, the way that it affects everything. God is the same way, and obviously he wasn't buying that. So
You were pretty pretty strong believer at a really young age.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
to be that young and to have those analogies rolling around in your head, I mean,
Yeah. Well,
you
these are
really
the
thought
things
about
my
it.
dad. Yeah. These are the things that my parents kind of instilled in me. Like when I would ask them about how do we know God is real, these were the answers they gave me. Like, look up in the sky. How do the clouds stay up there? And maybe for them that was just their way of talking to a 6 or 7-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And where they couldn't explain it, more complex. But for me, that was, those were my arguments. And I think the second time that I ever met an atheist was in middle school, and because I went to a Christian private middle school.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So everybody there was Christian, and I just remember like one year this new kid kind of came in, and he was the only atheist in the whole school.
And how did that get found out? Was he kind of outspoken about it too?
He was outspoken. He was definitely outspoken because remember this is
That
a
takes
Christian
some
private
guts.
school.
Yeah, at a
Oh,
Christian school.
yeah, yeah. Especially
Wow.
when literally every other kid is a Christian, and you're the only one who's like, nah, I don't believe in God.
Yeah, that's
So,
crazy.
yeah, so he, very similar to the story I just told about, the caregiver at the daycare I was at. Everybody was looking to me, and they were just like, "Hey, man, like this guy's an atheist, like you can help him, you know what I mean? Like you can demonstrate that God is actually real, And so, yeah, I just remember people pitting me up against him, and them just kind of taunting him, like all right, go debate Jeremy. Jeremy's gonna shut you down in the argument. And so, again, this is something I'll never forget. He just walked up to me with this like super cocky face, and he
Oh
was just
no.
like, yeah, he was just like, prove it. He was like, I want you to prove it. Prove to me right now that God exists. And that was just so intimidating. Like I had nothing for him, like I had no arguments. I had nothing. And I just remember giving him like some real woo woo answer. I was just like, now is not the time. I can't tell you right now,
That's pretty.
and
That is
yeah,
pretty intimidating to be put on the spot like that, especially if you have friends like, yeah, Jeremy can do it, and you're like,
exactly.
really, guys? Like,
Exactly. I had nothing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, and the only other time that I met an atheist in my life was was in college. Actually, my roommate ended up being an atheist, and I was always like trying to like pick arguments with him, but he was like the nicest guy in the world. He did not want to fight about that type of thing.
you know what I find interesting is that you remember the specific people, not just vaguely, but really well. The 3 people
Oh,
that
yeah.
you ever met that were atheists. That must have made a really strong impression on you each time.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think when I got into college, actually, if you're familiar, like once you go into college, like when you're first starting, they have like the big orientation,
Yeah.
and then you can kind of like wander around and see what type of clubs and organizations might interest you. And I just remember the only one that interested me at the time was there was this atheist club. Now, again, this is why I'm still Christian. There was just this atheist, club, and I was like, man, I would really love to like just kind of pick their brains and figure out like why, why don't they believe in God, And I also just thought I would just come into that club and just like shut everybody down, like I would have all my arguments,
Yeah.
and everybody would convert to Christianity, and it would be great, But I went like the first three meetings, and I remember like I was just completely silent throughout the meetings because I was the only Christian in the club.
Mm.
And one day, on that third meeting, I decided to speak up for the first time, and I made my first like argument, and they just completely shut me down, man. And I like,
Interesting.
yeah, and not in a rude way at all. Like I made an argument. One person made a counter argument, and I was like, man, that's literally all I got.
Oh no.
And, and yeah, I stayed silent for the rest of the time, and I never went back. Like I just was like, this is hurting my faith right now.
It was too much too soon.
Exactly. I can't surround myself with, all these, doubters and non-believers. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I
Yeah.
stopped. Yeah.
So had you mentioned in an email to me that you used to do like street preaching, or you preach city to city.
Yeah, city to city.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So at a very early age, I started to really take my faith seriously. And I told my dad that I wanted to preach. At this point, I was about 8 or 9 years old. And so my dad was like, okay. So he taught me how to put together a sermon. Um, and since he was a minister in the church, he was actually taking like sermon preparation classes. And he would get like these
Oh.
these worksheets on how to prepare a sermon and like the different types of sermons. And so he would bring those worksheets home and share them with me, and I would just study them. And that's kind of how I learned to preach.
You were really like studious and you were really curious. I mean,
Yeah,
at a
yeah,
very young age.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
the
cool.
the Bible fascinated me, man. Like, um, I just like all the stories. Like, obviously, it's so different from real life. As a kid, it just immediately captivates you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, or at least for me, it
Yeah,
did.
some of the stories are like amazing. When you're a kid, it's just like, whoa, Jonah and the
Yeah,
whale,
yeah,
Noah's Ark, all that stuff.
yeah. Elijah flying up to heaven in like a chariot, with fire. Like that's
Right.
crazy, right? So yeah, so I took interest at a very young age. Eventually, my parents actually started letting me preach for them and like practice my sermons on them. So we would have like these little mini church services in their bedroom. Like my sister, she would sing, and then I would come up after her and I would preach. So that's really when I started taking the Bible seriously. I remember during that time of my life, I would be memorizing like whole chapters in the Bible. Um, I specifically remember memorizing, for example, Revelation 20. Like
Oh
that was my
wow.
chapter. Yeah, and it's so dark too. Like if you read Revelation 20, like it's about like the judgment seat of Christ and people getting like thrown into hell and all this stuff.
Wow.
Um,
That's funny. That's the one you chose.
That was the one I chose. I memorized that thing front to back. Like I memorized it word for word. And I mean, I would even quote it like at family dinners. Like my parents were just so proud of me that, when we would have, we'd go out with friends, with other family friends, they would ask me to quote it. And
Oh wow.
so, yeah, I really, really enjoyed that. I remember my dad also giving me like a concordance. And I started like looking up the Greek and the Hebrew and
Oh whoa. I didn't do that till
yeah.
college.
Yeah, no, I was really, really heavy into that. And I would definitely use those things in my sermons, like, so, all my other friends, obviously, they thought that all this stuff was like super boring. But I love the Bible, man. I would bring it to school and like read it during lunch and on the school bus. I don't know. Did you do that? Like bring your,
Oh, yeah, I brought it to high school because it was it was like a witnessing tool. Like if someone might see me reading it, but then also I was trying to like learn. So I was trying to like read as much as I could, especially like in high school.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's funny too, because, I hear a lot of people like in their experience as Christians, they felt this call to like really evangelize people like in their everyday life.
Yeah.
I felt like, I guess as a Christian, I felt like I kind of had an excuse because I was preaching. And, when I went to churches and I preached, at the end, I would do an altar call, you know what I mean? And people would give their life to Christ. So I felt like, in school and things like that, I didn't necessarily have to like win people over because I was already doing my job. All I had to do at that point was just kind of live a lifestyle, a Christian lifestyle.
That's a lot less pressure in your day to day.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
When you did the altar calls, were you still really young?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is still me being like 10, 11 years old.
Wow, that's amazing. I don't know if I've ever seen a child that young preach like in front of a church. So you'd go church to church, your parents, just different churches, and give a sermon and do an altar call just like a regular pastor would.
Yep. In my church and a bunch of other churches in my city, and then in the surrounding cities in our area. I would just be invited. The churches would hear about me and they would just invite me.
So what's funny is I usually like to ask, like, how'd your faith mature as you grew older? But like your faith was really mature from a very young age. So how did it change? Right. So you got into college and you were still the same person, right? You were still a very devout Christian after going to that atheist meeting and your early college years.
Yeah. I was still very devout. For me, that didn't really faze me at all. I'll say this.
It stumped you and you were like, okay, I'm not going back there. I don't need that. I'm fine.
Exactly. I will say that one thing on my side was that as a Christian, a lot of people grow up like really fundamentalist. And I did as well. I grew up believing in the inerrancy of the Word of God. And, everything in that book was literal. But once I hit high school, that's when I really started to kind of take my faith apart and look at it critically. And so again, I went to a Christian private middle school, but I also went to a Christian private high school. It was the same one.
Okay.
And while I was in high school, that's when I was like really looking into things like evolution and like the Big Bang and things like that. And I was convinced that evolution was true. I was convinced that the Big Bang was true. And and I remember actually there being this debate in our high school. Like our teachers kind of set up a debate between the students because I kind of told my teachers, I was like, look, I believe in evolution. Like, can we talk about this? Can we actually like have a little argument about it?
Oh, wow.
And they did. They let us debate it, and I feel like we won, but
Yeah. Wow. At a Christian school, they let you do that.
At a Christian school, yeah, 100%.
I mean, that's pretty. That's commendable. I mean, like a lot of Christian schools would just shut that down, and it's interesting. That's interesting that you start getting into like evolution and Big Bang and all that.
Right. Yeah. No, I was super into that stuff, and I guess for me at the time, when I read, the book of Genesis at that point, all that to me was metaphor.
Wow.
Metaphor in the sense of like, this is a story, still inspired by God. It doesn't take away from the inspiration of the Bible, but it was a story inspired by God to just teach man a lesson about his own sin, his own sinful nature. Yeah. Like I didn't have to literally believe that there was a talking snake in the garden, and I didn't have to force myself to believe that, humanity started from just two human beings that were naked and ate a fruit and like kind of messed up the whole world. Like to me, all of that was just a story to tell us something deeper.
Yeah. That's the conclusion I ended up coming to when I was in college at Bible school, but I was I was at a liberal college. So like politically liberal and religiously liberal. So a lot of them believe that. Some of the professors were they held that belief. And so that's when I was first exposed to that. And that's kind of what opened the door to me to kind of going away from the church eventually. Cause then I started wondering about Jesus and his miracles and.
Yeah. Wait, so then for you, like, during high school, cause I know you said this didn't settle in until like college, right? So during high school, were you ever confronted with those questions about whether or not these things were literal? Like, did you have answers for those things? Did it sound ridiculous to you?
That's a really good question. Yeah. I don't, it's so funny. Like when you're in high school, I think sometimes your brain just doesn't go to certain areas, or it just doesn't think too deeply about certain things. With
Yeah.
evolution, I don't think I had never learned anything about it. All I knew is that I just knew it was wrong. It's like I didn't really have an explanation. In sophomore year, I remember watching a video on evolution and the teacher saying, okay, I understand, not everybody holds these beliefs, blah, blah, blah. It also seemed really, and so then they showed us the video, and that's like pretty much my exposure to evolution when I was growing up.
Wow.
But I remember it felt really hopeless. Like because if we just came out of nothing, pretty much like an amoeba or some, thing that just kind of happened it felt like if there's no, it just kind of led me down that dark path of like, well, if there's no God, then there's no purpose to life and we're just an accident. And I just think I kind of left it there and didn't really get into it too much. Not until I started getting interested in the Big Bang, like early college years. So like for me, that was early 20s because I kind of had a delay. I went to college and then I took a break and then went back. And so, yeah, that's when I started getting into the Big Bang. But no, I somehow I kind of blocked those things out.
Wow. Yeah, it's definitely amazing. Like looking back on my Christian journey and just realizing a lot. Like there's so many things that you kind of your mind just kind of glosses over. You know what I mean? Like things that are like super simple for me now, just as an atheist. Like as a Christian, I just didn't even compute. You know what I mean? Like it didn't make any sense. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, so you didn't feel like your faith was challenged in any way by believing in the Big Bang or by believing in evolution?
No. I forget who said it, but someone said, I remember just hearing a quote like, I believe in the Big Bang. I just also believe that there was someone who banged it, who put the bang in the Big Bang, So that was kind of my thing. I believe in the Big Bang. I would just say that God is the one who started it.
Okay.
And evolution is a process that God guided to lead to the evolution of human beings, that he can have a relationship with us.
Did you ever get any pushback from other Christians?
I
mean, obviously you had the debate in class, so there were other Christians who had the other point of view, but I'm curious, like personally, like friends or family or anything.
No, not really. I mean, my dad, I guess, me and my dad had a couple of arguments about it. And my dad is kind of like, we didn't come from monkeys. Like, you know what I mean? Like if we came from monkeys, then why are there still monkeys? Like, that's kind of like his,
that
was kind of his response. But, I didn't get a whole lot of pushback from people, mostly because nobody outside of my high school friends really knew about it. Like, I'm preaching at my church at this point too. Like I'm a minister in my church. And, I pretty much just didn't tell anybody that I believe that,
Okay. Yeah. I mean, those things don't come up all the time.
Yeah. And I really didn't think it mattered all that much, honestly, because I still believe the majority of everything else they believed.
Yeah.
I still believed in the inspiration of Scripture. I still believe Jesus Christ died for my sins and rose from the grave, and still believe in the power of the Holy Spirit and all those things. Does it really matter if I believe, 6,000 years ago, some people were in a garden and talked to a snake? Like, I don't know. Those things just didn't.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of Christians out there who still are that way. A lot of like Lutherans, Episcopalians, Methodists, some Catholics, are all totally fine with some of those scientific beliefs, so exactly. They found a way. And I was kind of hoping when I was deconverting that I could kind of fit into that group, because then you can have both, you can still believe this thing that gives you hope and that you're comfortable with, but also not have to defend that an animal could speak.
Exactly.
That's what bothered me, is having to explain to people whenever I got in arguments with people about like a talking snake or something ridiculous like that, some ridiculous miracle. That's when I got kind of squirmy or uncomfortable in my seat. You know what I mean? That's when I would start to feel like that's a sign that like what you're defending may not be the most reasonable position,
Yeah. It's so weird. I feel like for me, before I kind of stumbled upon like evolution and all that, when I would have conversations with people about this, I definitely wasn't ashamed of it. In my mind, it was like, we believe in, bigger miracles than that in the Bible. Like we believe some guy, some rabbi 2,000 years ago rose from the dead. Like, you know what I mean? That's that's a big deal. Like that's a big miracle. That's a lot bigger than a talking snake.
That's
So
an
for me,
interesting way to think about it. Like evolution,
yeah,
in a way, was like another miracle in your thinking, and it was
yeah,
one of so God could do anything. So of course He could do evolution. Why what's the
sure,
big deal?
sure. And
Interesting.
a lot of people obviously have the they have the objection that well then why did God take so long to create humans? Because the universe has been around for 13.8 billion years, and now it's now finally God decides to reveal Himself to human beings.
Right.
But for me, that didn't faze me at all, because in my mind, God is eternal. What does it say? 1,000 years is like a day in the eyes of the Lord, and
Yeah.
a day is like 1,000 years. So, for Him, that is a short amount of time. So it didn't really matter how long it was. It's just that's the process that He chose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're cruising along as far as this story goes, and you've been a strong
Yes.
Christian your entire life from a very, very young age, and you're
Yeah.
solid in your faith, feet are firmly planted on the ground. And so when do things start to change for you? When do you notice that maybe your faith is being challenged a little bit?
So that actually started in 2016.
Wow,
Um,
recently.
so very recent. Yeah, about three
Yeah.
years ago. Um, at our church, we had this big revival like type conference thing, and we invited this woman named Jacqueline Carr, who's you may not be familiar with her. She's not that famous, but she is a famous like young gospel singer. So we invited her and another person, another artist named Donnie McClurkin. Not sure if you're familiar with him as well, but yeah, we invited those two to come and preach, and also to perform, or I don't want to say perform, lead in worship is how we would say
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they came, and I just remember Jacqueline Carr when she was preaching. She was preaching a message about like how believers have the power to heal the sick and perform miracles and speak things into existence, and all this stuff. And yeah, I was just so pumped about that message. I definitely identify with that, because at that point in my life, I was very all about miracle, signs, wonders, healing, prophecy, the gifts of the Spirit. Like I was very heavy into that. And so everything she was saying was resonating with me. Like, when the Holy Ghost comes upon you, you shall receive power. Like that's what the Bible says. And so I believe that with all my heart. Um, After her sermon, there was this blind man in the congregation. And so she called him to the front
Oh,
to be healed.
wow.
Yeah, she was like, look, I just preached this sermon about healing and miracles. Let's demonstrate it. And I respected that. I was like, okay, you believe this, you show it.
Yeah, you'll
Uh,
never see like Benny Hinn pull someone up who's blind. I mean, maybe
right.
he has, I don't know, but it's always someone who's like, I have a sore back, or.
Exactly. And I mean, the,
Wow.
the best part about this was because we all knew who this person was. Like, we all knew who this blind person was.
Oh,
There
man.
was no shenanigans with this. If this happens, God is real.
Like,
You know what I
everyone
mean?
in that room is never leaving the faith.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she calls this blind man up in the congregation, calls him to the front, and I remember she just kept saying to him, like, you are going to be healed tonight. Like, you are going to be healed. You are going to walk away with your sight. And she said it just with so much passion. My faith was at an all-time high at that point. And as she was, laying hands on this man, I was probably like just near tears, because I knew that this man was about to get his sight back. And so she laid hands on him. Nothing happened. Um, she prayed again, laid hands on him. Nothing.
And the whole congregation's watching this.
Whole congregation is watching. After about the fourth time, I think that's when she started to realize that God wasn't about to heal this man tonight. And yeah, and then he went back to his seat the same
Oh
way.
my God.
Yeah, it was bad. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying anything bad against Jacqueline Carr either. You know what I mean? Like,
No, it
I
could be any other Christian who'd do that, yeah.
exactly. And again, at the moment, and even to this day, I commended her for preaching the message and then following through with what she believed. Like, if you really believe this, demonstrate that it can actually come to pass.
Yeah. My reaction was the devastation that man must have felt. Like
True.
they gave him
Very-
this little, like, this this amount of hope, and she's speaking it with such conviction that he's thinking, wow, like maybe this is the day, maybe it'll happen. And then 4 really intense prayers, and then he goes back to his seat,
Exactly. The same way.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was the mood in the church? What was her kind of, how did she back out of that? Because that's to say you're going to be healed of your blindness, and then, okay, why don't you go take a seat? It's not happening today,
You know what? To be honest, I don't remember what her her response to that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that would have been, to be honest, like thinking back, but yeah, but it happened.
But everybody just kind of accepted that, okay, not going to happen today, but that's okay.
Oh yeah, and that happens a lot, in church. You'll pray for some. I think Christians, for one, a lot of Christians are kind of used to the idea of praying for people and not necessarily getting the result that you want. You know what I mean? That's normal. And it's okay, because for a lot of Christians, it's like, well, maybe it wasn't God's will. Maybe it wasn't God's timing. Maybe we didn't have enough faith. Like there's a lot of things that you could say.
Excuses.
Exactly. Yeah. Essentially excuses. Right.
Yeah. But I totally agree with what you're saying. I know what you're saying. I'm not like trying to be combative or anything. Like, I totally agree. That's what I would have done. But in the end, it's like there's all these reasons for why God, or all these excuses for why God won't do something. And you know, we're used to having excuses away. So okay, so that's kind of how they
Yeah, which is crazy, because when I read the Bible, like and I guess this is what was so frustrating for me, is like when I read the Bible, you hear Jesus saying things like, ask and you shall receive, like seek and you shall find, knock, the door will be open for you,
firm, like no doubt about it.
He said, you will do greater works than I have done, like things like that those things are like guarantees almost, you know what I mean? Like this will happen for you, and so I went home that night like super frustrated, like how come God never heals these people when we ask him and when we pray and when we have faith? Because again, my faith was at an all-time high. I knew that it wasn't my, oh ye of little faith moment. I had a lot of faith, And so, whereas before I may have just chalked it up to this wasn't God's will, or we didn't have enough faith, like that didn't cut it for me this time. I was tired of the excuses. There's even another passage in the Bible that says like the effectual fervent prayer of the righteous man availeth much, which essentially just means that, righteous people will pray and things are supposed to happen. You know what I'm saying? Like, when it's within the will of God, And
there's a verse in Psalms that was something like, trust in the Lord with all your heart, or trust in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart.
Exactly.
And I understood that in the context of if it's within his will. But when you're a righteous, if you're an upstanding good person and you're reading these verses and you really believe them, when you pray, you kind of expect to see at least something, maybe some progress or a sign that that kind of proves that this is true, that these verses are true,
Yeah. You talk about that, like, we have this thought like it has to be in the will of God. It was just so weird that these miracles, these healings, they happen so rarely. It makes you wonder, like, why does God never will for these people to be healed? You know what I mean? Like,
never happens.
Yeah. And there are Christians who will, obviously say the opposite. And maybe even me at that time, I would have definitely said the opposite. But I haven't seen anything that I wasn't able to explain by natural means. But anyway, so for me, if the Bible is true, those things should be happening to some degree, or at least a lot more often than we do see them. And I remember that night, like just going home and talking to my dad in the kitchen, and I just told him straight up, I was like, Dad, I'm frustrated. I was like, I honestly can't say I believe in miracles right now. And I think that shocked him, because again, this is his son that like has been preaching for like years, you know what I mean? And was super passionate about God. Like, I was the kid that like would come home from school and like lay my face on the floor and like just worship God for like hours and hours and hours. And so for this kid now to be saying, I don't believe in miracles right now. I think that really shocked him. It was like, how can you expect me to believe in miracles when every time we pray for miracles, nothing happens? you know.
Yeah.
I still believe in God with all my heart. Like I was still a very fervent Christian, all of that. Like I still believe in inspiration of scripture, you know, Holy Spirit power, all that stuff.
But
But
that moment was powerful
miracles,
for you. Like it
that
really hit
that
you.
that was the tipping point, man. That was the what do they say, the straw that like broke the camel's back. Like
Yeah.
that was it. You know, I was like, no, like God, if you mean what you say in that Bible, I need you to do something, you know? Um, and I even remember telling my dad, like, you know, this is really my doubting Thomas moment right now. Like, I'm at this point, like, I need to see the scars in the hands at this point, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so that was the first time I ever like seriously questioned God. But I think the breaking point was when I actually became an atheist was a few months later after that revival. I was doing a study on Judaism,
Interesting.
you know, and it just kind of hit me like, why do we worship the God of the Jews? Like, I don't know where that question came from, but in my mind, I was like, I really want to know, why do we worship this God? Like throughout world history, there have been so many different understandings and interpretations of God. Like Muslims call it Allah, people of India call it Brahman, the Chinese call it the Tao, you know, the Jews call it Yahweh. But like out of all of these different understandings of God, why do we follow the Jewish one? You know,
That's a
like
good
what's so
question.
special about the Jewish version of God, right?
Yeah.
So me being the person I was, I set out on a mission to prove that the God of the Jews was the only true God. And that was a bad idea. Because as I started looking, you know, the deeper I delved into it, the more disappointed I was at the things that I was finding. In a nutshell, I basically ended up finding out that the God of the Jews wasn't even original to the Jews. That the God of the Jews was essentially just an offshoot of other pagan religions that had come before it. Um, and so to explain this just a little bit,
Yeah,
because I know most people probably,
that is interesting because before you
yeah,
start explaining it, it's interesting
sure.
because I don't think I've thought about I don't think I've given much thought at all to how Judaism began, other than like what the Bible says. You
Yeah.
know, like if you're maybe a anthropologist or something might know that really well. But yeah, I'm curious. What did you end up finding out?
Yeah, yeah. So in the Bible, God is referred to as El a lot. El is an E-L-L,
Yeah.
as in El Shaddai, Israel, Gabriel. Like all these names have that word El on it, and that's a title for God. But what I didn't know is that El is also the name of a pagan Canaanite god that predated Judaism. And so we actually have archaeological evidence that the people of Israel used to be Canaanites and they worshipped this pagan god El. That's why they're called Israel, because they worship this pagan Canaanite deity. And over time, El was conflated as Yahweh, the God of the Jews. And I guess it really hit me when I started looking at some of the similarities between the God of the Jews and the Canaanite god El. Like they say, El was like the chief of the gods. He dwelt on a mountaintop. He was called El Shaddai, the father of all creatures, creator of heaven and earth. He resides in a tabernacle. You know, he's called the God of the patriarchs. He covenants with them, promises them descendants. Like when I just list all those things off, a lot of people will call to mind the God of the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, but
But it wasn't originally.
it wasn't originally. Originally, it was this pagan Canaanite deity El, and that's where the God of the Bible came from. So
Wow.
it all started out as pagan mythology. And when I first started learning this, I thought it was just like some conspiracy theory, you know, like, you know, why haven't I heard this before? You know, I've been studying the Bible for years. Why haven't I heard this? But later I found out that it's actually like the mainstream view among biblical scholars. Um,
Wow.
like if you go to divinity school and you take a class on Judaism, you will most likely learn this stuff because it's not just some
Interesting.
theory. Like it's literally an idea that's been supported by like a good chunk of archaeological and textual evidence.
Well, it makes perfect sense too. It's not like it came out of nowhere. You know, it evolved.
Yeah,
It's kind of like evolution. I mean, there's religious evolution. You know, things kind of morph. You know, and um,
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And it shouldn't surprise people too much because the Bible is, you know, repeatedly talks about how the Israelites were constantly straying away from God and worshiping other gods and, you know, and like,
yeah,
you know, worshiping the Baals and the Asherahs and things like that. Like that's normal in the Bible. So it shouldn't be a
yeah,
surprise that before all of this, before Judaism, before Yahweh was introduced to the Jewish people, there was another God that they were worshiping. And then they just ended up conflating that God as Yahweh.
yeah.
Uh, and so me finding that out like that just like wrecked me, man. Like that just wrecked my whole faith.
Wow.
The God that I was worshiping, I found out came from ancient Canaanite myths. Like that was crazy. And
It's
so
like I'm thinking of The Wizard of Oz, and you're like pulling the curtain back, and it's that moment like
exactly,
what I thought, it's not even close to what is reality.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like suddenly, like after I realized that, it suddenly kind of made sense why in the Bible, like God is like endorsing slavery and like telling people to cut off parts of their genitals and like, he needs like the smell of animal blood to appease his anger, like stuff like that. I'm like, is this the type of things that I would expect from the God of the universe? Or is this exactly what I would expect from an ancient Near East society at the time, just trying to figure things out?
Right, a barbaric society from thousands of years ago, and all their gods were this way, and Yahweh is just like all these other gods, just angry and jealous and spiteful, and yeah.
I was like, for me, it kind of boiled down to which is more likely. Like, is it more likely that the God of the universe just happened to reveal himself to man in a way that looks identical to the other gods that were running around at the time?
I know, right? Yeah.
Or did people just make some shit up?
Yeah.
Like which is more likely? We know that people make stuff up all the time. We know that people had, there were thousands of gods, at the time. Like what? This makes sense. This makes more sense, I think, than the former.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of went through that process a bit too. Like at the end of the day, you're looking at all the claims of Christianity, and you're looking at reality and kind of weighing them and going, what seems to be the easiest one to explain?
Exactly.
Usually the simpler explanation is usually the more reasonable. Makes sense. The Christian one, yeah.
Exactly. That's Occam's razor. That was a big deal for me too. Occam's razor, it says that, when you're dealing with two competing hypotheses, you should prefer the one that requires you to make the least amount of assumptions. And it was clear at that point which one made the least amount of assumptions,
So did it feel like it was that time frame of studying Judaism? Was there a moment when you're like, yeah, I'm done? Like,
yeah, it's so funny. I remember the exact day and time. It was literally October 25th, 2016 at 1:20 p.m. is when I became an atheist. The only reason I remember that is because when I left the faith, I made a list of questions that I was like, these are the reasons why I'm leaving, and I screenshotted it and then I sent it to my fiancé. She was my girlfriend at the time.
Okay,
but yeah.
And find out like where she's at, but go ahead and finish what you're saying.
Yeah. No, I screenshotted it. So essentially, you can see the time and the date, and all that.
Gotcha.
So I was able to know exactly when I left. It's so funny too, because I've heard so many stories about when people leave the faith, like, they always say it wasn't one thing for me. It was really like a progression. And, I can't really pinpoint when I left, and it's kind of blurry. Yeah. For me, it was literally a moment.
You have the time. Yeah. It's time stamped.
That time when I left, and it was just like, okay, this is it. I can't keep going with this faith that has originated in pagan mythology. Like, I'm not doing that. I don't believe in pagan gods. And if my God is just an offshoot of that, I can't be down with that.
Was there fallout immediately for you? With like, did you share it? Well, you sent it to your fiance, so let's start there. So What was her response to that?
Yeah. So, she was really cool about it, honestly. I mean, she was a Christian at the moment as well. But she was just like, okay, tell me why. Why don't you believe in God? And I shared with her my reasons, and she was just like, okay, that makes sense. I get that. I was like,
what?
Yeah, for me, I really thought it was over at that point. I thought that once I sent her this text message,
oh no,
I didn't think we were gonna break up necessarily, but I thought it would cause a rift between us. You know what I'm saying? Like,
so were you pretty nervous when you were about to send that to her?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because I didn't know how she would react, and some of the questions on there were like pretty blatant. Like, I remember like one of my questions, it was like, if God exists, why is he commanding people to circumcise their penises? Like, I remember it was something like that. Like, again, there was just a long list of questions. That was one of the more ridiculous ones, but
Yeah.
a long list of really good questions that she, I guess she hadn't thought about before and hadn't like wrestled with before, you know?
And so her response was, okay, those are reasonable. Did she struggle with the idea of there not being a God?
At that moment, no. I think in fact, I remember the very next day, she actually sent me a Facebook message with a link in it that was talking about, pretty much about like not giving up on your faith and all that stuff. I don't know if she was like slowly
Okay.
trying to bring me back to
Yeah.
Christianity, but
Okay, so
yeah,
yeah, she
she
was
was
still in the
definitely,
Christian camp then. She was still
she
trying
was.
to kind of live that life.
She was.
Okay.
She actually left. She left a couple of months after I left, and her fallout was more due to being in college, and she had taken some courses that really forced her to wrestle with the Bible, not as a guide to your life, but more as a historical document.
Mm.
And I think that once she started seeing the human fingerprints all over the Bible, it didn't make sense anymore that this was, the word of an all-powerful, omniscient creator.
Yeah.
And so because of how close our deconversion experiences were to each other, I think a lot of people, even our families, thought that we were we kind of led each other astray,
Yeah. It's so frustrating because
and
there's a narrative that they just create, and then you're just, it's almost like they're excusing away your experience.
it can definitely feel like that. I mean, I will say that I've, I've I've really wrestled with that thought a lot. Like, did we in some way, cause each other to leave the faith? And I kind of like ended up thinking, you know what? Like, I feel like it would be kind of naive of us to think that we had no influence on each other. And the way that we explained it to people is that we both kind of just gave each other space to wrestle with these ideas. Prior to meeting this wonderful woman, like, I had a lot of these questions and just didn't feel safe to go far enough to say, I don't believe in this anymore,
Yeah.
And I think that each of us kind of allowed each other to ask those questions without responding with a churchy answer. Like, to just leave the question and just say, okay, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to this question is,
That's pretty awesome. I mean, that's neat
Yeah.
to just to have a friend like that, to be able to say, here's my question, like, let's talk about this, or here's my question, what would you say to that? And to have that kind of, there's no like emotion, you're taking the emotion out of it and you're just trying to think it out.
Exactly.
That's pretty
Exactly.
cool.
And we really allowed each other to do that. Aside from that, I would say that there was literally nothing influenced our decision to leave the faith besides our own comfortability with each other to share those things. But we each kind of had our own journey. And so, yeah, she was definitely the first person I told. The next person I told was my dad. And that was super hard.
Yeah.
I decided to take my dad out to lunch to tell him.
Oh God,
And,
I'm like just getting like the knot in my stomach almost, like thinking about it. Like, cause I had a moment like that with my mom, like on the phone, and just
oh man,
I was so incredibly nervous and like, I mean, kind of terrified to tell her, like, cause it could mean the end of the relationship. So
really?
how did your so you're gonna take him to lunch?
Yeah. I took him out to lunch, and I just let him know before we went. I was like, Dad, I got to tell you something. It's super important.
So you kind of prepped
And
him so he knows it's a big deal coming. And were you feeling nervous at all, or were you kind of
oh
like, no, I'm
man,
okay?
I was super nervous. Like, and it's weird because I've always been able to talk to my dad about anything. Me and my dad have been like super close my whole life,
Yeah.
and I've never had a problem telling him how I feel about anything. But I was, for whatever reason, super nervous this time. I almost compare it to like when you're trying to break up with somebody and like you don't know how to like tell them. Like, you can't just say, I don't want to be with you anymore.
Uh
You know
huh.
what I mean? Like that feeling in your stomach that you're talking about. I definitely felt that because, when we were at lunch, I was just like struggling to get it out. I was like, Dad, I've been having some doubts. And he was just like, well, everybody has doubts.
And you're like, oh, Dad, you don't know. You don't know what I'm going to say. Like,
yeah. I was just like, I was like leading up to it. I was like, no, like, you don't understand. Like, I've been questioning like everything, and he was like, oh, it's okay to question your faith, like
because he still thinks you're in the early stages at this point.
Exactly.
He didn't know about all the other stuff. Yeah.
He doesn't know that I'm an atheist at this point. And I don't want to come out right and tell him, but, I just can't. At a certain point, I was just like, Dad, I don't know if I believe any of this stuff anymore, And I think that's when it finally clicked and like sinked in. And I told him my reasons. We had like a little mini argument. And at the end, he was like, well, just don't throw it all away. Like, hold on to the little faith that you have. God can turn that mustard seed faith into a mountain, like this is just a phase. God will reveal himself to you. Just keep the faith.
That's how my dad treated me. I love my dad. But he also felt like this is a phase and I'll come around.
Right. Exactly. And, he actually has repeated that too. Sometimes he'll be like, I understand that this is a phase, I believe that God is going to bring you out of this. And, my response has always been the same. I've said, Dad, you could be right. Maybe at some point in my life in the future, I'll come back to Christianity. I don't ever want to say, what will not or cannot happen. But at this point, I'm just about as confident in this as I was when I was a Christian.
Yeah.
So I don't want to ever say that God will not reveal himself to me. If God is out there, I'm begging him to. But at this moment, I don't see it being a phase, right? So, but yeah, I don't know if at that time he realized how serious it was. It definitely took me a while to like really tell him like, this is it. I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
I'm done, because a lot of it was at stake, obviously, because I was a minister in the church, and I was still preaching.
You were still preaching at that time.
Yeah, well, actually, so after I became an atheist, I didn't accept any more engagement. Like people were still reaching out to me. Yeah, and I would just tell them I'm not accepting any invitations to preach at this time. Thank you, like something like that. Very simple.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still was at my church, still serving communion at my church, still preaching, still, I've taught Sunday school, so I was like still teaching and all that. Yeah. Still had to like lead prayers. And it was what's that? You said you did too?
Well, I wasn't in front of the church at that point, but my family would ask, I was going to Bible school. So like here we're at like Easter dinner and my family would ask me to pray. Like my parents, my sisters, we'd all be sitting around the table with our families. And they would ask me to pray, and so I'd pray, and I'm thinking like I felt like such a fake, doing that.
Exactly. That perfectly describes how I felt in that moment because it's so funny. Like when I would lead prayers, and I was an atheist at that point. When I would lead prayers, it's like all my prayers would start off with God, if you're there, like God, if you are listening, blah 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 blah.
Interesting.
So. That may have been the first hint to a lot of people that something was off.
Yeah, right. God, if you happen to be real.
Yeah, exactly. I remember having conversations with my dad too. Like, Dad, I don't feel comfortable doing this anymore. I don't feel comfortable praying in front of a congregation to a God I don't even believe in.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, even to this day, sometimes I have nightmares about standing in front of my church and having to lead prayer because. Wow. I'm an atheist, you know what I mean? Like, how can I do that? And I feel like I'm just like deceiving everyone. So I decided to actually tell my pastor.
Oh, wow.
I take my pastor out to lunch, just like my dad.
Here we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the breakup lunch. Yeah.
Exactly. I take him out to lunch again, stumbling over all my words. And I'm just like, eventually I just tell him, I don't know if I believe in any of this anymore. And then my pastor says, he kind of relates to me. He says, you know what, I've definitely been there too. I've definitely been in a place where I've doubted God before. He was like, so what do you want to do when it comes to ministry? Like, where do you want to take this now that you are in this position? Do you want to continue in ministry or do you want to leave? And I said, because again, So put it this way. In my mind, when he asked that question, I was ready to say, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to leave. But I couldn't make it out in that moment. So I ended up just saying, you know what? I'm give me a month maybe, and I can get back to you and tell you if this is just a phase and you know, I'm back on fire for God again. Like, just give me a month and we'll see. And he was like, okay. He was like, let me know. He's like, if you can't serve in ministry anymore, just let me know and we'll make the proper changes. He was like, but I would hate to see you go.
Yeah.
And that hit me, man. That hit me right in my heart.
Yeah, because these are people you care about.
Absolutely. And so yeah, I continued to serve in ministry. I continued to serve communion, you know, serving the body and the blood of a man that I don't think is divine, and leading prayers and all that. And I think people started noticing that I wasn't lifting my hands in worship anymore. I wasn't singing along with any of the worship songs anymore. And some people confronted me about it. I remember one lady in particular confronted me and was like, you don't seem the same. Like, you're not, you know, you don't worship God the way that you used to. Wow. So people were definitely noticing. And then after a month, I literally just came back to my pastor and was like, I took him out to lunch again. And I was just like, I can't do it. I was like, I don't know what you want to do. I don't know how you want to, you know, expose this to the congregation. This is going to break a lot of people's hearts, but I can't continue in ministry.
Yeah.
And he essentially was like, well, I want you to come up with, you know, what your decision is going to be. Do you want to tell people do you want to tell the congregation that you're an atheist? Like, is that the way that you want to go out? And so I had a lot of conversations with my dad about this. And it just so happened that right around that time, I was also going off to school. Mm-hmm. And the school was about an hour or so away from my church. And so me and my dad kind of resolved to just, in order to kind of soften the blow, just tell people that I'm going off to school, so I cannot serve in ministry anymore. Yeah. That's the reason why I can't do it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a lie, you know what I mean? Like, I really was going off to school, you know, that just wasn't the complete picture.
Right. Like, if you wanted to, you could drive that hour back to the church every Sunday.
Exactly.
Yeah. But
exactly.
That's kind of helpful though. I mean, it's okay to just kind of have another reason, and there's not necessarily a purpose in dropping that bomb in front of a whole congregation, you know?
Exactly. But I was going to do that too. For me, like, I try to be as honest as I can. And I prepared a speech where I was going to tell the whole congregation I'm an atheist. Wow. And my dad just, you know, gave me words of wisdom, like, that's not the smartest idea. You should just do this. Right. Yeah. And so, the day that I was going to announce it to the congregation that I was going off to school and couldn't serve in ministry anymore, before I did that, we had like a mini like meeting in the back with the rest of the ministers, the rest of the preachers that were on the board, mm-hmm. with my pastor in the room as well. And me and my pastor had already prepared for me to say this, but my pastor was like, Jeremy has something he wants to say to you all before we go out into the congregation, because he's going to make an announcement. But he's not going to give them the complete story. He's going to tell y'all what it is, but he's not going to tell the congregation.
Did you know he was going to put you on the spot like that?
Yeah, he definitely didn't put me on the spot.
Okay,
No.
Okay.
We had this conversation before.
Gotcha.
We had resolved to do this. So yeah, I stood in front of the ministerial board and I told them, I said, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God anymore. And I'm stepping down from ministry. And they were super receptive of me and comforting. And they were all just like, I understand, you know, you've done so much for the ministry, you know, you've taught us so much, and we're going to miss you, you know? Wow. And, That's
pretty remarkable how receptive everyone in your life was. I mean, from your dad to your pastor to the ministry board. I mean,
I can't complain, especially when you have so many other stories of people who have deconverted and have been kicked out of their house and, you know, been just excommunicated arrested, and
Yeah, but I'm
yeah,
sure it wasn't an easy, I mean, obviously it wasn't an easy process for you.
sure,
We all kind of, in our deconversion, no matter how severe or not, like we all have those moments where, we're super nervous to tell that person we care about that, yeah, I'm not Christian anymore, or just
exactly,
struggling with the whole idea that everything you believed isn't true anymore.
precisely, yeah. I ended up going up there and just telling them, going up on the pulpit and telling the congregation that I'm going off to school, I'm stepping down from ministry. I told the congregation, I said, there are some other reasons that I cannot discuss right now, but you will know later, is what I told them.
Wow. Talk about
Um,
a teaser. Like,
yeah.
they're all like, oh, he's
Right.
going off to school. Wait, what?
Yeah. No, there were definitely a couple of people that came to me afterwards, like, wait, what is this other reason that you're talking
Uh-huh.
about? And I definitely kept it under wraps. But after a certain point, I broke, man. I came out on Facebook. Like, I went on Facebook and was like, hey guys, the reason that I left was because I am an atheist, and I hope you can all still receive me and still welcome me as family, as
Yeah.
friend, whatever that is. And yeah, I again got a lot of love on Facebook. Everybody just was like, hey, you have your own journey. We respect it. We don't want to see you go. I did get a couple of, hostile people. One
Uh-huh.
person told me that I had like received the mark of the beast and I was like on my way to hell. But for the most part, everybody was super, super accommodating for where I
Wow.
was in my life.
What do you think was the most difficult part of that whole process for you?
Definitely telling my dad. I really think is really the sole thing that was really difficult. Was telling him, um, because honestly, the actual act of deconverting wasn't a negative experience for me. In fact, the very first emotion that I remember feeling when I became an atheist on that day was freedom. I felt
Wow.
it felt like I was a prisoner like for so long, and like the jail doors just kind of swung open,
Wow.
which is interesting because Paul in the Bible, he calls himself a prisoner of Christ, you know, and
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, it has a
yeah,
different meaning for you.
exactly. I mean, while I was in the faith, I guess it didn't feel like a prison necessarily, but when I left, I started realizing like yo, I literally dedicated all of me to God. I sacrificed my own desires for His desires. I did His will.
Wow.
Anything that came out of my mouth, I tried to make sure that it was pleasing to God, and
Yeah.
um, I was really Christ's prisoner. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
now, and I enjoyed it too. By the way, like I enjoyed being in prison to Christ. You could say I was institutionalized to some degree. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like I enjoyed my jail cell, you know. But when I deconverted, it really felt like freedom, and not freedom to sin,
But just
because a lot of
like
people have that
maybe
idea.
like it maybe like mental freedom, like freedom from these ideas or these things that were kind of constraining you.
Yeah, yeah, freedom to live my life for me finally, to live my life for me and for the people that I care about. I didn't have to live for God or for Christ anymore. I can actually my life is now in my own hands. Um, I can't anymore rely on God to make things happen for me. I can't rely on God to make a miracle. I have to make my own miracles now. You know what I mean? I'm responsible for my life,
That
and that was freeing. Yeah,
that's what I find most inspirational about stories like this, but your story, like to be able to say that, like I can live my life for myself now, and it's not a bad thing like some Christians will try to turn it into, where it's, oh, you're free to sin or you're free to, not listen to God anymore. It's
right.
it's not that. We all understand it's freedom to be you. Like I had to
Exactly.
rediscover myself. I had to rediscover who I was and what I enjoyed and what I wanted to do with my life. And
Exactly.
and that's a wonderful process to go through. Like you said, it's really
Yeah,
freeing.
it really is. I can say that as a Christian, like there's so many things that I kind of held myself back from doing, just because I thought it was sinful and evil, and I wouldn't go to parties. I wouldn't dare say a curse word. wouldn't have sex or anything like that. Like
Yeah.
I pretty much locked myself down. Again, this prison analogy, you know, I locked myself down for Christ. And so, yeah, that freedom, I just remember that day being like a lot of people describe deconverting as kind of like the death of a best friend type thing.
Okay,
You
I
know,
was going to ask you about this, so I'm curious what you're going to say.
yeah. A lot of people describe it like that. And like I said, my first emotion was definitely freedom and this sense of responsibility, self-responsibility. It was definitely followed by a little bit of despair and sorrow. But a lot of that came more from my fear of hell and death at this point.
Mm.
You know, the uncertainty of death. Because, you know, as atheists, we really don't know what happens. You know what I'm saying? Like, if there is not a God, the most reasonable thing to say is that nothing happens. But because no one has gone past death and come back to life, we can't say for sure what's beyond that point, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's this uncertainty that comes along with that. And then also just the idea that, like, yo, you just left a religion that told you that if you don't believe these things, you're going to burn for all eternity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so now leaving that, you just have these thoughts like, what if I'm wrong? You know?
Right.
If I'm wrong, and my dad, my dad used to always kind of say this, you know, he always used to pose that Pascal's wager.
Pascal's wager,
you know,
yep.
Exactly. Like if I'm right and you're wrong, you know, you would go to hell. You know, you have something to worry about. But if I'm wrong and you're right, I don't have anything. I'll just die. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, that thing did bother me for a little bit. But I did end up overcoming it over some time. I think it just really takes time.
I heard a really good response to that by an atheist. And I don't know how did you overcome that whole idea? Because that bothered me for a while. Like, well, they're kind of right. Like, you know.
Well, so for me, it was kind of like when you say God, like you're thinking of the Christian. When my dad says God and he's posing this Pascal's wager, he's thinking of the Christian God, right? But there's all kinds of potential consequences after death. You know what I mean? Like, what if you die and you end up in Allah is the true God?
That was exactly what helped me was that idea. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
you end up all of a sudden it's Allah.
Exactly. Where to some extent we are all taking a chance by, you know, putting our foot down in whether it's a religion or whether it's atheism. Like, we're all taking some sort of chance with that. And I'm fine with that chance. For me, if I'm doing the best I can and I am living the best life that I can and I'm seeking after truth with honesty and with integrity, which I know I am.
Yeah.
God, if God is real and if God exists, especially the Christian God, he would do everything he can to make sure that I know him, you know, and that he shows himself to me. If that doesn't happen, then either this God does not exist or this God doesn't want me to know him.
Yeah.
You know?
I always felt that way. A verse I used to quote was the, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart.
Right.
The way I always kind of apply that to my deconversion was, you know, people might think I left Christianity for a variety of different reasons, but or they might think that I'm being intellectually dishonest, or they might think that I, you know, want to live a sinful life, or whatever they think. I know I was truthful and honest, and I came at the questions with, you know, an open mind, and I was trying to be fair about it and trying to follow the facts where they lead. So I always felt comfort in the idea that if God existed, he knows my intentions, and he would know, and he would understand that. Any reasonable person, if they know that you had good intentions, would be understanding of you. And so that's what gave me comfort.
Right. And you know what? The most frustrating part about it is that literally I could list a number of things that would bring me back to God and bring me back to Christianity. A list. I could list it out. And literally, if God loves me as much as the Bible says that he does, if he loves me enough to die for me or send his son to die for me, he knows what it is that would convince me and bring me back to him. And he's not doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like, that to me, for me right now, that's one of the strongest reasons that I'm still an atheist, is because I remember times, even as an atheist, praying and saying, God, if you're out there, you know that I would love to come back to Christianity if these things are true. And you know what it is that would bring me back. And I just don't feel like you're doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know, man. Like if I always compare it to like a railroad, sorry, a railroad analogy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So if let's say that you had a son, I believe you have children,
Yeah, I
correct?
have two boys in high school. Yep.
Oh, nice. Okay, so this works perfectly. You have a son, and sorry, this is going to get morbid really
No,
quick.
it's okay. It's fine.
Okay, you have a son, and he is tied to we won't even say tied. He is standing on a railroad track, and there is a train coming, but for whatever reason, he can't hear it, he can't see it, nothing. And you're standing there in front of him in hand's reach, right? In arm's reach, and you could pull him off that train track. But what you decide to do is say, son, get off the railroad track. Son, get off the railroad track. A train is coming, you know? And the train is getting closer and closer. Your son cannot hear nor see the train. What do you do at that point? At some point, you have to pull him off the tracks. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so in my analogy, it's like that train is like hell, right? And I'm sitting on the path to hell right now, unknowingly. God knows exactly what it would be. Like my salvation is literally in arm's reach for God.
Yeah.
Any good father at that point would reach out and snatch his child away from that train.
Yeah.
And so, but the Christian narrative, it seems to me, at least the one that I grew up in, was that God, what he decides instead to do is to keep yelling at you and say, hey, get off the train tracks, get off the train tracks. Believe me, there is a train coming. Believe me. The son doesn't believe and then gets hit by the train.
Yeah.
And then he just stands there like, you should have believed.
Right.
You should have listened to me when I said it. And it's like, dude, come on now.
It's like
any reasonable person would pull you off that train track.
Yeah, it's like he gets off on like testing us or something,
Right.
Like, but then it's like, don't test the Lord your God. But then like he tests. I mean, I guess I don't know. He's God, so he can do whatever he wants. But
right.
but it's just it's a cruel test. And any loving human father, they might say, hey, get off the tracks. And if the son didn't hear him, they'd pull their son off the tracks. Like,
exactly.
And how easy is it for God to do even a tiny little miracle or just pull you off the train tracks? Yeah. Like, it's not hard for him at all, but he decides like, well, this is the game we're playing. You're going to either do what I say or you're done,
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So when you think back on, now that you're an atheist, it's not been long for you. It's only been a few years, but when you think back on kind of the most Christian version of yourself, what do you think about that person now?
I'm going to give you the positive and the negative side of this. Mm-hmm. So the positive side is that as a Christian, I genuinely feel like I did the best that I could with the information that I had at the time. And I feel like most people do. I think that from the vantage point that I was looking at, it makes perfect sense that I would believe the things that I did and respond to those beliefs the way that I did, Yeah. So I don't at all regret doing the best that I can with that information, I would say that the negative side of that is that the Christian version of me was afraid of everything. And what I mean by that is I was so afraid of displeasing God that I didn't allow myself to go to a club or have an extra drink or say a curse word. Like, I didn't allow myself to do anything because I was just so scared. I was literally afraid, not afraid of God, not afraid of going to hell or anything like that. I was afraid to displease him. All I wanted to do was please God. And so I just felt like God was watching me, and anything that I did, he's writing it down in his book. You know what I'm saying? And I wanted nothing more than to just please God. So looking back on the Christian version of myself, that's one thing that I regret, is I just feel like I've wasted so much time. Yeah. I'm 26 right now, you know what I mean? And I spent 23 years of that life, seriously worrying about something that, someone that probably doesn't even exist, a faith that probably isn't even accurate. You know what I mean? Like worrying about the musings of people that lived thousands and thousands of years ago, worrying about what they had to say about my life and my afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the one thing that I wish I could take back, is just taking back all those years. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I answer that.
Yeah. Is there any thought that you've had that helps you kind of come to terms with that idea? Because there's a lot of us that, no matter how old we are, when we deconvert, we look back and kind of, maybe regret is too strong of a word, but we regret the years that we could have spent maybe, learning something different or developing our personalities or becoming who we would have been. Is there anything that kind of gives you kind of peace of mind when you think about that, or are you still kind of struggling through that?
Honestly, I would say the only thing that really gives me peace of mind about that is that everything in my past at this point has led me to this incredible woman that I'm with today. And so, I have a beautiful fiance, and we are doing amazing together. And I would not have met her or been with her if I hadn't had the past that I had, including the Christian part of that.
Yeah.
So that's probably the one thing that gives me a lot of solace in thinking about that. But aside from that, a lot of it is just kind of like, well, I will say the other thing is being a Christian, I did a lot of service to people, and I do still cherish those moments. I made a lot of great connections with a lot of great people. My church is still filled with amazing people. I go back there every now and then. I definitely need to go more often just to see the people. I definitely would like to go more often just to see everybody, talk to everybody, but amazing people. And I made just so many great connections with them. Christianity was the thing that bound my family together. So my family relationships were nurtured by that,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, there's good that comes out of it. And like you said,
Exactly.
The service, and I mean, just the experience of like being intellectually honest with yourself and having those difficult conversations, but in a loving way with people that you care about. I mean, those are life lessons too. Like, having those conversations. Like, what's cool for you is that pastor and then your dad and other people that like, you've been able to kind of keep those relationships intact despite a difficult thing that could have, ripped some of those friendships and relationships apart. So that's exactly. A real cool thing that you were able to, get from all this,
100%.
Yeah. Well, what's something now that you are no longer a Christian, is there anything that you've been able to learn or anything that you've experienced that you don't think you ever would have if you had stayed a Christian?
Sex. I think sex without shame is...
Because you're not married yet, so that would have been a big no-no.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I definitely would not have experienced that while still a Christian. So, sorry, I know that's kind of like a one and done answer, but
no, it's fine. No, and I think that's a good answer because a lot of us were in that same boat. It's something you only do with the person you're married to.
Exactly. I don't have to feel guilty about it anymore. You know what I'm saying? As long as doing it safe, which I am. So, I definitely feel good about the enjoyment that I've gotten from being able to participate in that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not have to have the guilt and worry about that. You just live your life and be a human being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, when you think back on the really Christian version of yourself and how much you've changed, in some ways you've changed a lot. You're an atheist. Like in some ways that's the opposite of being a Christian,
Right.
But through that change, there's always something positive about yourself that stays the same. What would you point to in yourself that you would say, when I was a Christian, there's kind of a thread that carried through, and I still see this thing in myself, I still see this part of me that was always there. What would you say that is for you?
Yeah, I would say that I've always been very genuine with my search for truth. I was always seeking out the truth, no matter what that looked like, even as a Christian. A lot of the doctrines that I held, even as a Christian, were different than a lot of the other people in my circle. And even now today as an atheist, I'm not afraid to take truth wherever it leads me. And I think that honestly, that's a value that my dad really instilled in me very early on. When I started becoming a preacher, he always used to just repeat, like, study for yourself, research for yourself. Like, don't just believe what somebody else tells you, even if it comes from me. Like, don't believe anything I say until you've studied it for yourself. Like the Bible says, study to show your own self approved, and he would just repeat that to me. So I've always had that kind of way of thinking. I never take anybody's word for anything, even when it comes to science. Now that I'm an atheist, like, I don't take anybody's word for anything. I will literally go and I will look at the scientific journals. I will confirm what people are saying. So that value has always instilled in me. I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon.
That's pretty cool. I always love it when I think of my mom always kind of, she would feed that desire in me to learn about things, and she would give me books that were about subjects that were interesting to me when I was a kid. And so it's cool that even the Christian parents can still kind of instill in you that love of learning and really encourage that, or your pastors, or the adults
Absolutely.
in your life.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, there's someone listening right now who is going through deconversion and or has recently deconverted. What encouragement would you give that person who's going through that, or what guidance would you give them?
I would encourage people that are going through this process that you have literally figured out something that billions of other people have missed, and it's because you're willing to pursue truth whatever that means, So I would encourage people to don't be afraid to take that extra step. Don't be afraid to look stupid to a lot of people. You know what I mean? Like, it's so funny because, like, for me, atheism just seems so intuitive at this point. But when I first came out, I felt stupid. You know what I mean? I felt like everybody was looking at me like, "Are you serious? You don't believe in God? Like, how can you not believe in God?" Yeah. So yeah, just don't be afraid to take that step. I'll also say that when you first leave the faith, as we were discussing before, when you first leave the faith, you're going to see a lot of things that frustrate you. Especially if you live in America or in any Christian majority country, you're going to see a lot of things that will frustrate you and get you a little riled up. And if you're anything like me, you're going to want to respond to, like, everybody. But I just encourage people to spend some time just, like, having fun, spend some time rediscovering your true self apart from Christianity. Like, who are you really without, this faith?
That's awesome. That's like such great advice. I love that.
Yeah. Like, you're in control of your life now. Like, this is yours. You can do with it what you want. This is your opportunity to do all the things that your Christian self didn't allow you to do. So I would encourage people that, while all these things can be frustrating, talking to your parents is going to be frustrating, talking to your friends is going to be frustrating, but for a minute, just put all that to the side and just embrace the moment, embrace the fact that this is now your chance to, like, actually live your life the way you want to live it.
Yeah, discover it for yourself and live the life that you want to live. Just embrace it to the fullest.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is there anything we haven't touched on that you want to discuss?
No, I would like to recommend one resource. I may do that.
I forgot to ask that.
No, it's fine. There's this video on YouTube called "A Humbling Journey," and I think it's called "A Humbling Journey, Theist to Atheist" or something like that along those lines. I watched that video a million times when I first deconverted, and it was so helpful. It's like a 3-hour long video, but it really got me through some really hard times during my deconversion. So I would definitely recommend people that, are having a hard time with this, just go watch that video several times, because that thing is so inspirational, and it helped me. So I think it'll help a lot of people.
That's awesome. That's really great. I hadn't heard about that one yet.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your story, and I was really inspired by it. It's really neat to hear how the relationships panned out. And like we were kind of just saying about everybody else who's deconverting, for you, your life's just, your new life is just beginning. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You got a fiancé and things are going great, and you kind of figured out this religion thing, and you can kind of just go forward with your life and embrace it for all that it is. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, this was great. I love having conversations like this because I don't get to have them often.
Right.
At this point, me and my family don't really talk about religion. Just try to not. Let's not bring that back up. So it was actually really refreshing to get to talk to somebody about it. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast.